Ash choked the sky above Târgoviște, turning the daylight into a bruised, suffocating grey. Fire crawled along the timber frames of the village houses, the heat warping the air and turning the mud into a steaming, blackened slush. Every structure was a skeleton of glowing embers. In the center of the town square, the village had been replaced by a forest of sharpened stakes. They rose from the earth like jagged teeth, driven deep into the soil. Each stake held the weight of a fallen soldier, their bodies slumped in the stillness of death. The light from the dying fires caught the metal of their gear, casting long, distorted shadows that danced across the ruins. There was no sound of life, no movement. Only the rhythmic crackle of burning wood and the low, mournful whistle of the wind through the gaps in the timber. The village was a monument to a singular, absolute violence. It was not a battleground anymore. It was a graveyard. The village was gone, consumed by the very flames that now illuminated the path toward the castle. Vlad stepped from the tree line, his boots crushing charred debris into the mud. He stopped at the edge of the square, his gaze sweeping over the forest of stakes without a flicker of hesitation. The wind whipped around him, pulling at his form, but he remained still. He did not look away from the bodies. He did not flinch at the scent of decay. To him, the square was not a scene of slaughter. It was a completed task. He turned his back on the ruins, his movements precise and measured. The castle loomed ahead, a jagged silhouette. He began to walk. His hand rested on the hilt of his blade, his fingers tracing the worn leather grip. He moved with a heavy, rhythmic gait. He did not glance back at the burning village. The screams had long since faded. He reached the castle gate. He pushed the heavy iron door, stepping into the darkness of the hall. The interior of the castle was a hollow shell, stripped of tapestries and light. Vlad walked down the central corridor, his boots striking the cold stone with a sharp, echoing rhythm. He reached the vaulted chamber at the heart of the fortress. The air here was different. It felt heavy, pressing against his skin. He crossed the threshold, the temperature dropping until his breath became a faint gray mist. In the center of the room stood a raised stone altar, its surface scarred by centuries of neglect. Vlad approached it. He knelt, his knees hitting the floor with a dull thud. Beneath him, the stone was cold, vibrating with a low, subterranean hum. Ancient, jagged runes were carved into the rock, glowing with a faint, sickly luminescence that pulsed in time with his own heartbeat. He focused entirely on the runes, his body rigid, waiting for the stone to respond to his touch. Vlad leaned his forehead against the cold altar. He opened his mouth, but no sound emerged at first. He forced the air from his lungs, a low, rasping whisper that seemed to feed directly into the glowing grooves beneath him. He was not asking for power. He was offering the only currency he possessed, his own soul. The runes flared, turning from a dull pulse to a blinding, jagged white. The stone beneath his knees groaned, a sound like grinding tectonic plates. A hairline fracture appeared under his palm, then another, spider webbing rapidly across the floor toward the walls. The air pressure dropped, popping his ears. Every candle lining the chamber walls flickered once, twice, and then vanished in unison, as if snuffed by a single, massive hand. The room plunged into total, suffocating blackness. The smell of ozone intensified, sharp enough to taste on his tongue. He did not pull back. The vibration in the floor grew violent, rattling the very foundations of the castle. There was no going back. The chamber held its breath, waiting for the void to answer. A thunderclap shattered the silence, rocking the castle walls. Outside, the sky tore open. A jagged streak of lightning illuminated the valley, followed by a roar that shook the very foundations of the earth. In the chamber, the floor gave way. Massive fissures ripped through the stone, spilling cold, unnatural air into the room. Vlad stood, his boots sliding on the shifting debris. Through the cracks, the ground itself seemed to bleed darkness. From the depths of the earth, shadows detached from the soil. They surged upward, coalescing into the forms of warriors. Their bodies were hollow, mere husks of armor and bone, yet they moved with a terrifying, fluid precision. Pale, sickly light ignited within their empty eye sockets, casting long, flickering shadows against the walls. The air grew frigid, thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. The prince turned, his gaze sweeping over the sea of glowing eyes. Dawn bled over the horizon, casting a thin, grey light across the valley floor. The enemy general sat tall in his saddle, his hand resting on the pommel of his blade, waiting for the expected clash of steel. He squinted into the mist. There was no movement, no drums, no war cries, only a wall of absolute, unnatural darkness standing where the village should have been. It was not a formation of men. It was a void carved into the landscape. The general spurred his mount forward, his eyes straining to pierce the gloom. He saw the pale, sickly light flickering within the ranks of the shadows. His horse reared, nostrils flaring as it caught the scent of something that did not belong to the living world. The general froze. He reached for his sword, but his fingers refused to close around the hilt. The silence from the dark wall was heavier than any roar. He felt the courage drain from his chest, leaving him hollow. His sword slipped from his grip, hitting the stone with a sharp, final ring that echoed across the valley. Behind him, the front line of his army faltered. The formation broke. The general did not look back as his soldiers turned and began to run. The retreat was a frantic scramble of boots on stone and panicked shouts. Soldiers abandoned their gear, tripping over shields and broken spears in their desperate rush to reach the hills. They did not get far. Behind them, the wall of darkness surged. It did not march. It flowed. Like ink, spilled across dry parchment, the Shadow Legion poured over the valley floor, expanding with terrifying, liquid speed. There was no resistance. The shadows moved through the fleeing men as if they were smoke, their touch turning flesh to ice. A soldier reached the crest of a ridge, his hands clawing at the dirt, but a hand of shadow clamped onto his ankle. He was pulled backward, his scream cut short as the darkness surged over him. The sound of the slaughter was not the clash of steel, but a wet, muffled silence. The shadows swarmed, a tide of hollow forms, consuming everything in their path. Men vanished into the gloom, their faces twisted in final, soundless pleas. The dark army moved with a singular, predatory focus, closing the distance between the living and the void. Within seconds, the frantic movement of the retreat ceased. The valley was reclaimed by the dark, and the screams that had filled the air were swallowed, leaving behind only the sound of the wind. The sun crested the jagged horizon, spilling a harsh, unforgiving light across the valley. The darkness that had consumed the night retreated, leaving behind a landscape stripped of life. Where thousands had stood only hours before, there was now nothing but the stillness of the grave. The ground was littered with the remnants of a broken force. Discarded shields lay face down in the mud, their metal dulled by the morning dew. Broken banners now rested in the dirt like discarded rags. The air held no scent of blood, only the cold, metallic tang of the earth. Vlad stood in the center of the field, his boots sinking into the soft, churned soil. He looked toward the hills, but the path of the retreat was empty. No soldiers remained to challenge him. The silence was absolute. He remained motionless, a solitary figure amidst the debris of his own making. He had achieved the total destruction he sought, yet the victory felt hollow. He turned slowly, his gaze sweeping over the vast, vacant expanse. He stood alone, the undisputed master of a silent, empty world. Vlad turned toward the ranks of his silent, dark army. He expected the stillness of soldiers awaiting a command, but the air around them began to shimmer. The solid forms of the legion started to fray at the edges, turning into thin, wispy ribbons of grey vapor. They were not leaving, they were unmaking themselves. Vlad stepped forward, his hand raised to halt the process, but his fingers passed through the cold, swirling mist. The warriors dissolved like smoke caught in a gale, their pale eyes flickering out one by one until the field was empty once more. He lunged at the nearest shadow, his grip finding only the biting, freezing air. The last of the legion vanished into the morning haze, leaving no trace of their presence behind. Vlad stood with his hand outstretched, his fingers trembling as the final remnants of his power slipped through his grasp. The silence of the valley returned, sharper and more absolute than before. He looked at his empty palms, the reality of his isolation sinking in. The triumph he had felt moments ago withered, replaced by a creeping, hollow dread. He was alone in the center of the field, and for the first time, the stillness did not feel like victory. It felt like a warning. A sudden, crushing pressure settled onto his shoulders, as if the weight of 1,000 souls had been poured into his frame. Vlad gasped, his knees buckling under the unexpected burden. It was not the weight of armor, but a cold phantom density that seeped into his marrow. He tried to stand, but his muscles moved with a sluggish, alien rhythm. He looked down at his hands, expecting to see his own skin, but he felt only the hollow space within. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. He was not the commander of the abyss. He was the vessel. The shadows had not served him. They had been waiting for a host to anchor them to the world. He reached for his sword, but his arm refused to obey, locking into place as if controlled by strings. He was the cage they had chosen to inhabit, a living prison for the darkness he thought he had mastered. He stood frozen in the center of the field, his own body no longer his to command, trapped in the silence of his own skin.